morning. So as Chris said, my name's Jim. It's good to be here this morning. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a confession. It's actually interesting how this worked out. I mentioned to my wife yesterday that I was going to start the message off and reveal something about myself, that I'm a closeted nerd. She said, I don't think that's going to come as a surprise to anyone. Then I told my daughter, and to stoke my ego a little bit, I was going to do the same thing, and she said, you're not a nerd, you're so cool. Oh, that's why you're my favorite. So, I'm a little bit of a closeted nerd. There are things that I enjoy, and when I say closeted nerd, it's the things that really I enjoy. I enjoy things that have to do with superheroes, sci-fi, fantasy, like elves, dragons, all those kinds of things. I enjoy those kinds of things. Those are the kind of books I want to read, or movies I want to see, or shows I like to watch. And it's honestly much to my wife's disapproval. I'm a little bit of a movie buff, so when we go away on vacations, I like to watch movies, and the movies I tend to bring with me would be anything like Marvel, Avengers, anything that has to do with sci-fi, or the Matrix trilogy, something along those lines. That's how I relax. That's how I would decompress. It's how I would enjoy my time a little bit. So very much so, the same kind of shows that I would get into have to do with the same kind of a feeling, the same kind of sci-fi element, anything with a dragon or an elf, or anything to do with some kind of weird space biopic. I would dive into that. My wife can't stand that kind of a thing. And it's a little bit of a disparagement in our marriage, because she's one of those people that's like true crime and maybe a little bit of comedy, and then she's in bed by like 9 or 10 at the latest. So when I want to watch my show, she's like, can you just wait? Like, can you hold off on that till I go to bed? Can you just wait until I'm done? Because there's just zero interest in anything to do with that. Well, no self-respecting nerd can really be a nerd without really being a Star Wars fan. Any other Star Wars fans here? Yeah. Come on, I know there are more nerds than that. There's a reason it's one of the most popular movie series in the world. No person can really be a self-respecting nerd without being a Star Wars fan. And one of the weird traditions my family has, or rather I guess that I have, every year around Christmas time, my daughter and I watch through the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogies, those 6 movies that are like, someone's saying, well, fellow nerds unite. We'll gather in the hall afterwards and make plans to go to Comic-Con. Every Christmas we watch through. That's a big commitment. One of the other things we do is we like to watch through the Star Wars series. They keep rolling out more movies, and we have to keep finding time to try to fit them in. Well, a few years ago, I got into this Star Wars spin-off TV series on Disney Plus called The Mandalorians. Anyone here The Mandalorians before? Anybody here wish they were a Mandalorian? No. My wife's shaking her head. No, not me. Well, I got into this Mandalorian TV show, and this was it's a really interesting show. If you don't know anything about it, and I can feel all of the judgy eye rolls right now. I can sense the judgment. Here's the thing. We all like weird things. This morning, you're just going to have to listen to mine because I'm the one with the microphone. But whole judgment aside, we are going to go someplace with this. This TV show, The Mandalorian, it's about a soldier. He's like a soldier for hire. He's this guy who's dedicated his life, and the TV show follows his adventures and his group of people and their adventures through kind of this space odyssey. It's almost a little bit like a space western, very like Clint Eastwood-esque. They follow him around, and what's amazing isn't that these people are incredible fighters, and they are, and the effects, it's all amazing. What's really cool about the show is that him and this group of people, they have this code of ethics, this kind of way that they would live their life. They've devoted themselves to. As a matter of fact, multiple times throughout this series, you hear them say this phrase. Anytime they're kind of agreeing to a decision, or they're coming to a conclusion, or they're about to do something significant, they would say this phrase, this is the way. The way. That's what they've devoted themselves to, the way. And it's this code of ethics that kind of brings them together. And what's really interesting is that the way they choose to walk, it doesn't always seem the easiest way. Sometimes it seems counterintuitive, and it seems difficult. It seems that the road that they're about to walk is a difficult road. And from the outside looking in, you wonder, why would you do this? And they always come to the conclusion, and they would look at each other and say, this is the way. This is the way. This is the way we're going to live. This is because of our code of ethics. This is the conclusion we're going to come to. This is the way. And here's what's really interesting about this. is that the way doesn't always seem the best to everyone else. But to them, it doesn't matter because this is their way. This is our way. This is what we've subscribed to. So regardless of how anyone else views this is what we're going to do because this is our way. Here's why I go through all that. You know a little bit more about me. You know that I'm a little bit of a nerd and I like Star Wars and sci-fi. But here's what I find really interesting. None of us here are Mandalorians, and some of you may be disappointed. They're like, oh, I'm so disappointed. Some of you may be really happy. I'm glad. That's my wife in the second row. We're not Mandalorians, but we all have a way, don't we? We have a way that we walk through life. We have a way that we do things. We have a way that we view or choose to view the world or to view how we kind of walk through our life. We have a way that we choose to view how we parent our children. We have a way to choose how we kind of live and act throughout our marriage. We have a way that we choose to walk through our life. We have a way that we choose to view our finances. Some of us are the spenders. Others are the savers. We really hope those people meet. Makes it better for everyone else. We have a way that we choose to view everything about our life, our approach to the world. There's a way that we think the world ought to work. There's a way that we think our country ought to work. There's a way that we think people ought to act, ethics or morality, something that they live by. We all have this way of our own, every single one of us. But maybe you've never thought about it that way. Maybe you say, that's interesting, but I've never really thought about my way. But now that you say that, I guess it's just the way I was raised. I guess it's just the culture that I grew up in, maybe the part of the country that I was raised in, or the part of the world that I grew up in. I guess now that you're saying it, some of this makes sense, Jim. There is a way, but I've never really thought about it like that before. But we all have a way that we choose to live. And I think it's important that we take a moment and we think about the way that we're living. Take a moment to just stop for a minute and really ask, is this the way we want to live? And I think it's really important that we do this because the way that we choose to live, the way that we choose to view the world, the way that we choose to kind of carry out our life, the way that we choose to treat our marriage and our children and our finances, it kind of sets us on a path, the way. It's going to determine our outcome. It's going to determine where we end up. It's going to determine the joy and the peace and the fulfillment of our life. It's going to determine our experience in this life. It's going to determine the legacy that we leave behind to our children. The way that we choose to live leaves a legacy. It influences our children and our next generation, and it'll even influence our communities to some extent. And so the way that we do life, the way that we view life, the way that we choose to go about life is a really, really big deal. How we're living, who we're looking to for guidance, how we choose to view the world. That's why we started this series, The Way of Jesus. This counterintuitive way of Jesus. Through this series, I want us to just take a minute to start by examining ourselves, by examining our way, and then kind of look and kind of dive into Scripture about this way of Jesus, the way that he invites us into, that seems counterintuitive and maybe even countercultural. But he's made an invitation. And he said, there's a way. You have your way, and the Mandalorians have their way. But here's my way. You see, contrary to popular belief, the original invitation of Jesus wasn't about subscribing to a set of beliefs. It wasn't just about just believe and everything's done. Your journey in faith is complete, and believe and you'll get to heaven. Maybe that's what you were told as a kid. If you had any experience in church, just believe and you'll get to heaven. And that's what Christianity, that's what this faith journey is all about. But that was never really the original invitation of Jesus. It was never simply about just believing. As a matter of fact, the gospel writer Matthew, he records this. He actually tells these series of instances where Jesus comes and makes this invitation. Matthew was one of the people who walked around with Jesus. He did life with Jesus. He saw him eat, he saw him sleep, which was just weird to think about Jesus doing like normal human things. But then he saw Jesus do ministry, and he saw Jesus die. And then he saw the resurrected Jesus. And then a few years after that, Matthew's doing ministry. He kind of sits back and he writes this detailed account of the life of Jesus, of what it was like to live like Jesus and to walk with Jesus. In this account, he records the invitation that Jesus made to his original followers. This is in Matthew 4. He says it this way. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting nets into the lake, for they were fishermen. Matthew was really detailed. He wanted to make sure you understood why they were fishing. Come, follow me, Jesus said. Come, follow me. Not believe. Follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. And at once they left their nets and they followed him. Immediately, Matthew continues. He says, and going out from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John. John becomes the gospel writer of the book of John, the closest disciple to Jesus, or at least that's John's confession of it. Jesus meets these two brothers. They're in their boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. And he called out to them, and immediately they left their boat and their father, and they followed him. Are you seeing Jesus' invitation yet? And Matthew says, this is really interesting, but it doesn't stop there. A few chapters later, he actually records Jesus' interaction with him. And it's really weird how he writes this. He's writing it to a group of people, and he's writing in the third person. But I'm going to read it to you as though Matthew were here telling you the story. Jesus meets these two fishermen, then he meets these two fishermen. He invites them to follow. They follow him. And then he goes on. He says, and Jesus went on from there. And he met another guy. And it was me. It's Matthew. And he finds me sitting at my tax collector's booth. And if you were here, he would tell you, and I was so ashamed that that's where he found me. He found me at my tax collector's booth, and he said, follow me. And I got up, and I followed him. Do you guys see the invitation of Jesus? The original invitation wasn't believe and you'll be saved, or believe and you'll just go to heaven. It was, guys, it's so much more than that. Follow me. Follow me into this new thing. Follow me into this brand new thing that I'm bringing out to the world. Don't just stop at believe. It's so much more than simply a set of beliefs. It was follow me into my new way of life. Follow me into this new way I'm going to show you, and then live it. Live this life. Live like me. Become like me. Live life in God's world, God's way. You know, there's a big difference between believing and following. I think we all know that. You can believe something's good for you and never do anything about it. Like, I'm continually told by my wife and my kids and the people around me that drinking water is good for you. I believe that drinking water is good for you. Yet I would rather have a cup of coffee all the time. I believe drinking water is good for you, but the first thing I do when I get to work is get my quad shot Americano and drink that. It doesn't matter how much I believe, and you can send all the emails you want and say, that's not good for you, that's a lot of caffeine. I know. My doctor told me, my wife told me, I hear it all the time. I can believe that something might be good for me, but if I don't do anything about it, what good is the belief? You can believe, and it never changed the way that we live. And that's why Jesus' invitation wasn't just to believe. The invitation was to follow, because following requires participation. Following requires getting up and doing something different about it. It requires us to put some action to the things that we say we actually believe in. And you said, I want you to follow me into this new life, into this new way of living. And then I want you to live it, and I want it to change you. I want it to change the way you view the world, and you view your marriage, and the way you view people. I want you to follow me and let it change you. James, the brother of Jesus, later in the New Testament, he's writing to a group of believers, a group of people who subscribe to this belief system. And he sees in them what we see a problem with this. Guys, you're just choosing to believe. And he says it this way. He says, you believe in one God, good. Even the demons believe that and tremble. Now, don't misunderstand me. He's not calling, and I'm not calling any of you demons. He's saying, but even something evil, even something wrong can believe, but it doesn't change their life. It doesn't change what they do. He said, it's more than just believing. It requires participation. It requires action. It requires you. The invitation is to do something with it. This is why the people who first subscribed to Jesus, who followed Jesus, they called themselves followers of the way, not Christians. This term Christians was actually given to them later on in history by a group of people in Antioch who were looking out at these people who would follow Jesus, the followers of the way. And they said, these people who are following, like talking about Jesus and living this way, they look a lot like Jesus, a lot like this person they're describing. They look like little Jesuses or little Christ, so they called them Christians, which means little Christ. But the people who first started following Jesus, they called themselves followers of the way because Jesus said, I am the way, and here is the way, and follow me into the way. They knew that following Jesus was more about just believing something. Following Jesus was about living in a way. That their life would reorient, that the way they viewed their relationships, everything would reorient to Jesus' way of doing. To becoming more like Jesus. To living more like Jesus. Which is why, if I'm honest, it's such a shame in our culture, in this day and age, that we've kind of dumbed down the invitation. We've kind of dumbed down Jesus' invitation to simply believe, and there's a problem with that, and I think all of us can kind of see that, because it's easy to believe and not do anything different, not change the way that we're living. We've made something that Jesus said it's an invitation to shift your whole life and your whole way of being, and we said, well, just believe. And I think the problem with that is when we dumb down his invitation to it, we miss the power, we miss the potential of the invitation to transform our lives, to make us more like Jesus. This is why I spend so many times talking with Christians who are disinterested, and they're disillusioned, and they're just kind of complacent, and they're deconverting from their faith because nothing changed. They're kind of walking through life and saying, yeah, well, why even do this? Nothing in my life has changed. Because you can believe and nothing would ever change. But you can't follow and not change. And we find ourselves looking at Christians who are moving on, and maybe you're here and you're not even sure about the Christian faith. You have your own questions. You find the Christian faith uncompelling. You find it unattractive because you've spent time with people who've claimed to be Christians, who've claimed to be followers of the way. You say, yeah, but their life doesn't look any different. Their life doesn't look anything like the Jesus that I've heard about. And so you've stood on the outside, and I understand why, because a system that's built just on belief and no change, it is unappealing and uncompelling and unattractive. And so Jesus' invitation wasn't simply to believe. He said, don't settle for believing. Follow me. And following isn't less than believing. It's so much more than believing. He says, follow me. And the implications of follow me are huge. They're staggering. The implications of what it looks like for someone to follow Jesus are massive. As a matter of fact, we're going to look, Matthew records this as well. At one of Jesus' most famous sermons, we don't have time to walk through it all, but in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, he records this message that Jesus gives, and it's the message that Jesus probably went through time and time again and repeated time and time again. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. You may have heard of it if you've been in church. If you've never been in church, my guess is you've heard pieces of this message. This is the time where Jesus said, I want you to love your enemies. I want you to be salt and light. I want you to live a life that seems counterintuitive and countercultural to the rest of society. I want you to live in a way that looks different than the rest of the world. This is the Sermon on the Mount. And if you've never read through it, here's my challenge before we even get to the end. I want to encourage you to read through the Sermon on the Mount. You could do it in a day. It's just a few chapters long, or you could stretch it out over a week and read snippets. You could read it every week for an entire year, and it wouldn't be a waste of time because there's so much in it. Every time you'd read it, you'd get something new from it. This is Jesus' kind of broad overview of his new kingdom way of living. I've come to introduce something new to you, and I want you to follow me into this new way of living. So I would encourage you, if you haven't read it, you should. Read through the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus gets done with this message, this whole sermon, and towards the end of it, he kind of capstones this message with this observation, this almost like an illustration that has this hidden invitation in it for you and I. He says all these things about how we need to live our lives in this different kind of a way. And then he kind of concludes his thoughts with this in Matthew 7. Enter through the narrow gate, he says. For wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But, he says, small is the gate. Narrow is the road that leads to life. And only a few find it. He's looking out over this crowd after describing this way of living that seems so different than how we've chosen to live, how these people have chosen to live. And he says there's really two ways that you can go about life. And I know we're all thinking we all have our own ways, right? I was raised in a cultural family. My family was Italian, and my family was Hispanic, and I came from this part of the world, and I choose to view things this way. We all have our own ways. And in this one statement, he kind of boils, and I say, yeah, I understand all that. And those are cultural, and they're valuable, and that's your family's way. I get all that. He said, but really, there's only two ways that you're going to walk through this world. There's only two ways that you're going to do this life. There's only two ways that you're going to kind of walk through this life. There's this broad way. It's wide, and it's easy to see. It's hard to miss. And many will walk that road. And then there's this narrow way. It says there's two paths. This broad road, it leads to destruction. And if you're here and you hear that, you think, that's it. Jesus is sending us all to hell. That's what he's saying. I understand that. But he's not even using the word hell here. He's used this word for destruction. It actually means waste or ruin. He said that there's this broad way, this wide way that many people are going to walk down, and it leads to waste. It leads to ruin. It's at the end of it, you're going to feel like my life's been wasted. Or there's a narrow way. Which way are you on? There's a wide way that leads to destruction. It leads to a wasted life. And there's a narrow way that leads to life. But many people miss it. And of these two ways to live, this first way, this wide way that leads to destruction, he said this wide way, it's kind of marked by two things. And what's interesting about this is he said, even though it's marked by this, many people kind of walk this way. Many people walk this road. It's all the crowds are moving in the same direction. Have you ever noticed how as people, we just love to kind of all get in the same direction and move? If you don't believe me, go to a mall. Have you ever gone to a mall and you see it? There's no signs, but there's like a natural traffic flow. There's a natural movement in the mall. We like to jump in and we just kind of move with the crowd. Have you ever seen these social experiments where there's a crowd of people and someone just gets up and frantically runs in a direction? And then little by little, people start following and running. We don't even know why. We just all want to move in the same direction. Something's happening, let's move. He said that's like this wide road, this broad road. All the traffic's moving in the same direction. And this wide road, it's kind of marked by these two guardrails, if you will. He said one side of the guardrail it's like worldliness. And the other side of the guardrail is religiousness. What's worldliness? On one side of this, he said, this is a theologian. He's talking about this broad road and these two kind of guardrails on either side. The side that's worldliness is just the cultural values, the social values of the day. If we look at it like in our context, in our time, it's the cultural values of today. And you've probably heard this 1, 2, maybe 10 times, 10 different ways. It's a value that says you can do what you want, whenever you want, with whoever you want, however you want. As long as you're not hurting anyone else, just do you, just be you, just live your truth, just live it your way. And at the end, you'll find fulfillment and you'll find joy and you'll feel like your life's complete. And Jesus said, no, that's not true. It promises fulfillment, it promises joy, but at the end, it's wasted and it's ruined. This broad road is marked by worldliness that says you can be led by your own desires and just dive all into a life where you're the master, where you're in charge, where you know what's best. And it promises joy in the end, but it never keeps its promise. He said, but the other side of this same road, this broad road, Where one guardrail is worldliness, the other guardrail is religiousness, which, if I'm honest, it's odd because it sounds in total conflict to the worldliness idea. But this religious idea is this other side that somehow we can live in a way to get God to do what we want him to do. That if I do enough good things and if I do enough of a certain thing, that somehow I can manipulate God to give me the things I want. But both ways lead to the same outcome. Both ways lead to waste and ruin. One way says just follow your own inclinations, just follow your own impulses, just be the master of your life and you'll be happy. The other way says, I know God's up there and God's in charge, but if I do these things, I can somehow manipulate and get what I want out of God. And he said both ways of this broad road lead to ruin and waste. But there's another way. And he says this other way is this narrow way. And when he says narrow, maybe the first thought that comes to your mind is great, Jesus is talking about being like this narrow-minded bigot. It's not what he's talking about at all, because nobody wants that. We don't want to be that. Jesus didn't want us to be that. He said it's a narrow way. It's hard to miss, or it's hard to see. There's not a lot of signs, and not a lot of traffic is moving in that direction. It's narrow, but here's the thing. It's open and it's accessible to everyone. But few people find it. Few people get there. But this way, he says, this way leads to life. This way is my way. This way is the countercultural, the counterintuitive way of living that I just talked to you about. But Jesus, what are you talking about? Read Matthew 5, 6, 7. The Sermon on the Mount, this different way of living. He said, I've showed you what it looks like. Jesus, what is this narrow way? He said, the narrow way looks like this. It's following me into a way where you learn to be salt and light in your world. It's following me into a way where you learn to bless and benefit the world around you for God's glory and for the good of others. He said, this narrow way, if you follow me into it, it's a life learning to see everyone as your neighbor and treat everyone as though they were created in God's image and they have value, and treat them the way that you want to be treated. Follow me into this narrow way, Jesus says, and it's learning to love and forgive your enemies and to pray for those who hurt you. He said in this narrow way, it's learning fulfillment and self-denial, which sounds completely opposite to what we've been told. But he said in following that way, you find fulfillment and you find joy when you pour your life out for those around you. In this narrow way, it's not being led by your own desires and your own inclinations. It's submitting your life to the life of God. He says this is the narrow way. It's like sacrificial generosity. It's trusting God to provide for things, even no matter what, regardless of what life will throw at you. This is the narrow way. And it's not the easiest way. And it's not the well-trodden path. And many people aren't moving in this direction. But Jesus said, this is the way. This is my way. And this way leads to life. I want you to live in a way that leads to life, which I understand sounds a little confusing. In Scripture, there are three ideas. There's three ways that they use this word life. And one of them in particular, the way Jesus used it here, it's called Zoe. And this Greek word Zoe that talks about life, it's talking about the quality of your life. He says, I want to lead you in a way, to live a life where your quality of your life improves, where you step into this life abundant. In other places, Jesus was asked why he was here. He says, I am here that you might have life and have it more abundantly. This is what he's referring to. I want to lead you into a way of living, into a way of viewing, into a way of doing life that seems different to the other people around you, that seems different to culture and to the world. And few people are going to walk this road. But if you follow me down this road that I'm leading you towards, you'll experience life in its fullness. You'll experience joy. You'll experience peace. You'll experience contentment. At the end, you won't feel like life is wasted or ruined. You'll feel like it's a full, abundant life. That's the way I'm leading you. The words of the Mandalorians, this is the way. I told you that Jesus couple this idea, this observation, this illustration with the invitation. And the invitation is hidden in the scripture. It's not super clear, but it's this invitation that Jesus extends to all of us, that he extended to all of his followers. You can walk through life and you can walk it the wide way. You can see all those the roadsides pointing to the wide, the broad road, and keep with the moving of traffic. And you can live your life in a way where you're being led by your desires and the way that you want to live. And you're the master of your life. And you can do what you want, with who you want, whenever you want, how you want, as long as you're not hurting anyone. You can follow that road. And it promises joy, and it promises contentment, but it lies. And at the end, you'll feel like it's wasted and ruined. You can follow this broad road thinking that somehow I can live in a way to manipulate God, to do all of these good things that therefore God would have to do the things I want him to do. He said it's going to lead you to the same feeling of waste and ruin. Or you can follow the narrow way that few find. Not many people are living and walking this way, and it seems countercultural. And you might even stand out because you're going to be going in the opposite direction of traffic. But this way leads to life and fullness of it. And in this, he extends to us an invitation. And it's a twofold invitation. He said, we've talked about these ways, and I've showed you my way, and I've talked about how to live out my way. The question I have for you is what way are you living? The first part of this invitation is an invitation to sit and stop for a minute and contemplate. What way am I living? Am I following my own desires and my own inclinations? Am I just living the life with me as the master? Am I living in a way that somehow I have to earn God's affection and God's approval, and I can live and do things to get God to do the things I want to do, that somehow at the end of all of that, I'll be good enough? What way are you living? And are you satisfied with where it's taking you? Who do you look to for guidance? At the end of it, as you walk this road, as you take a minute now and you just stop and contemplate, do you like where you're headed? Do you like who you're becoming? Jesus said the first part of this invitation is for you to take a minute and to stop and to contemplate. What way am I living? And am I satisfied with where it's taking me? And if you're not, the second part of this invitation is Jesus' invitation to every person who came and followed him. Then follow me. Follow me out of the broad, follow me out of culture, follow me out of the way of the world into something brand new. And I'll lead you to life, and I'll lead you to its fullness. You just have to follow me out. So here's how I want to close this morning. I want to extend that same invitation to you. Guys, what way are you living? Maybe you're here and you've been coming to church for a while and you're not really sure what you believe about all this. It's kind of new for you. So you say, oh, I've never really followed Jesus' way, so clearly I'm kind of doing my own thing. Are you happy with where it's taking you? Do you like the person you're becoming? Who do you look to when you need guidance? Maybe you've been in church for a while and you've never really taken a moment to stop and assess and contemplate the way that you're walking. You say, I thought I was on the right path, but as I stop and I think for a minute, Jim, there are moments where I realize I'm living in a way to try to get God to do what I want him to do. Somewhere, it's like I was on the right path, but now the paths have blended, and I'm trying to do my thing and bring God's thing into it, and it's not really working. And my invitation for you is this morning, would you just stop for a moment and follow Jesus again? Here's how this works. You don't have to get up and walk and do anything weird. You just have to invite him in. Jesus, I'm on the wrong path. I've been going the wrong way. I'm not happy with the direction it's taking me. Will you come and will you lead me out? All you have to do is change paths, and you can change paths at any time. If there is still breath in your lungs, there is still time for you to change paths, to change ways. This morning, the invitation sits with you. What way are you living? And are you happy with the way you're living and where it's taking you? And if not, would you follow Jesus? Would you follow his way into a new life? Into a life that's marked by participation and contribution, and not simply consumption. Or a life that ends in joy and fulfillment, in peace and contentment, or a life that ends in waste and ruin. Guys, I'm going to pray for you, but that's my call to you. What way are you living? And if it's not the way you want, if it's taking you in a direction you don't want to go, would you just agree with me in this prayer? Would you invite Jesus in and say, Jesus, I'm on a wrong way. I'm on a wrong path. I don't like where it's going. I didn't know where to go, but now I do. Would you come and would you lead me? Let me pray first before we go. Father, I thank you, Lord, for loving us so much. God, that even in the midst of our lives and in the midst of God, us just kind of living and existing, you've provided a better way. God, for some of us, we've missed it. We've missed it for years. For others of us, we just see this gradual shift where we're sitting back in the driver's seat, where we're in control, where we're following ourselves. God, and it's hard for us to admit that, and sometimes it's hard for us to see that, but now, would you give us the wisdom? Would you give us the awareness to see the way that we're living, and perhaps the way that we're not following you? God, would you give us the courage for those of us who are willing this morning to say, I don't want to follow my way, I don't want to walk my path. But Jesus, this morning, I want to follow you. Would you give us the courage to invite you in and say, Jesus, this morning, will you lead me into a new way? And God, as we follow you, I pray that we would begin to see your promise come to fruition in our lives, the promise of joy and fulfillment, of life abundant. Give us the wisdom to see these things and the courage to take a step in your direction, to become more like Jesus, to live life his way. In his precious, matchless name I pray. Amen.